He's been seen as an upright officer, someone involved in the fight against corruption as a bureaucrat, as the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, and also a Supreme Court appointed administrator looking into the workings of the cricket board. But Vinod Rai, who has now written this book, Rethinking Governance, holding to account India's public institutions, hasn't been without his share of controversies, whether it's the Comptroller and Auditor General's 2G report and the acquittals of all those accused, or reports of disagreement among the BCCI administrators. He joins us now to discuss this book, which looks at various institutions, whether it's the CAG, it's the Supreme Court, Parliament, or the Cricket Board. CAG and Vinod Rai, absolutely synonymous. I don't think you'd disagree with that. But you've written about the functioning of the Comptroller and Auditor General, and this entire book is about accountability. How would you respond to those who say that your own accountability needs to be questioned in the context of everyone having been acquitted in the 2G spectrum case?
That is the entire core issue of this. But anybody who says that the acquittal has anything to do with the CAG is making a very fundamental mistake. What does this Comptroller and Auditor General do? He does audit. He does audit by looking at government records and culling out from details from those records, putting them into the form of an audit report and putting it into Parliament. After that, what happened on this? Certain PILs were filed.
Yes.
Supreme Court went into it. Supreme Court did not base any of their findings on the CAG's report. In fact, if you read the Supreme Court verdict, it clearly says that this Comptroller and Auditor General's report is in the PAC. We are not using that report as the base. The Supreme Court's verdict was based entirely upon the evidence that was put before them in terms of records or whatever there was in the PIL.
So when you come across people like Manish Tiwari of the Congress or Kapil Sibal saying, and just to quote Manish Tiwari, Vinod Rai, former CAG, must apologize to the nation for throwing presumptive, sensational, corrosive numbers into public discourse. He was the author of the imbecile 1.76 thousand crore loss theory that I had destroyed during my cross-examination. How would you respond?
He is free to air his opinions.
It's that 1.76 lakh crore number which is controversial. The fact that everybody was acquitted seems to indicate that that presumption was wrong.
That is exactly what I'm coming to. When I mentioned that if you say the acquittal was incorrect, then the Supreme Court cancelling the licenses based on totally independent evidence. It had nothing to do with the CAG's audit report. So you take the corollary. Supreme Court went into evidence, went into whatever records that were produced before them. Supreme Court cancelled those licenses, 122 of them. Okay. Now the CAG does not do investigation. The CAG merely does audit from records. The investigation was done by the CBI, and the CBI, with whatever evidence that was before them, they
Do you believe the CBI verdict was wrong?
No. The criminal intent, criminal investigation is what the CBI was doing.
But that criminal investigation, sir, was based on the presumption that there was money which was of the entire allocation process. The presumptive loss which this last government suffered was the basis on which the investigations took place at the level of the CBI. Who was responsible for that?
Totally unfounded. That's incorrect. The CBI's investigation was independent of the CAG's audit or 1,76,000. The CAG's report has no evidentiary value in a court. The CBI did totally independent investigation, and when the acquittal took place, and I have quoted from that acquittal order what the trial court judge has said. He has said that I kept waiting for the investigation agency to bring their evidence, to bring their witnesses and produce before me.
So you're saying it's a failure of the CBI?
I'm not saying that. You read the judge.
I'm asking you that because that's why I've read the judgment. The judgment says I have absolutely no hesitation in holding that prosecution has miserably failed to prove any of the charges against any of the accused. So you stand by that report of 1.76 lakh crores being the loss?
If I had to do the audit based on those documents, those very documents, with my competent professional auditors, I'm sure we'd come to the same conclusion.
So you stand 100% by that, and you are saying that what you have, that presumptive loss number and what finally happened completely different. One doesn't necessarily follow from the other.
Audit and investigation are two entirely different things. The basis itself is very different.
So then how would you respond to those who say, for example, Kapil Sibal, and here's a direct quote, "The kind of environment created by the media, the opposition, by Vinod Rai, the telecom sector is in a dire state today, and this is entirely because of Vinod Rai and the opposition at that time." That you were somehow responsible, your institution, CAG, was responsible for creating this environment which resulted in all sorts of things. And the telecom sector, as a result, has suffered.
Do you think, would you be willing to believe that the Supreme Court would be guided by this? Who cancelled the licenses?
The Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court. Supreme Court has made it clear in their judgment itself that they are not relying upon the CAG's audit report. Now, there was a huge amount of cacophony going around in the media and things about the allocation of licenses. Supreme Court based itself very devoid from that cacophony, based itself entirely upon the value of the evidence that was produced before them. So they came to their independent conclusion. Now, if you say the acquittal has anything to do with the audit, it is actually the Supreme Court which can cancel the licenses.
So when, for example, Congress leaders or others in the opposition at the time said presumptive loss does not occur in accounting lexicon, there are certain parts of the IT Act where presumptive loss is looked at, but presumptive loss does not occur in the accounting lexicon, how would you respond? Because the point they're making is that you had overreached yourself.
If you look at the World Bank documents, each of one of those documents explains, and the terminology used is presumptive loss, number one.
No, but in the context of CAG, does CAG in the past, has it relied on presumptive loss?
Every report of the Comptroller and Auditor General which deals with the revenue foregone, when we do sales tax, when we are doing sales tax, income tax, talks about revenue foregone, different terminologies have been used. And when I talk about World Bank, it's talking about the World Bank audit terminology. So it's a universally accepted phenomenon. We did not invent it.
And this has been there in other CAG reports in the past as well, presumptive loss?
Presumptive loss or whatever. I'm
asking you specifically, sir. Presumptive loss as a construct used by the CAG in assessing reports, has that been there in the past as well?
Absolutely, for performance audits. See, there are different types of audits.
Yes.
You do a transaction audit, you do a performance audit.
Was this a performance audit? It wasn't.
This was a performance audit. This was a performance audit, and the terminology used, the guidelines used are ones which are given out by the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. So we've done nothing beyond what are the guidelines.
So this wasn't a formulation out of thin air, as the Congress has said?
Well, anybody is free to have his viewpoint. As far as we are concerned, audit bases itself on very on documents and by guidelines which are kosher, absolutely.
So how would you respond to those, and this is a direct question, who say that Vinod Rai brought down the UPA government?
Must I respond? Do you think the fabric of this democracy is so fragile that one report will bring down a government? I need not say more.
This went on for several years, sir. There was an atmosphere which was created, there were leaks which came out in the media, everybody reported it, we also reported it, everybody reported it. There were Supreme Court judgments, there were telecom ministers put behind bars, and then there was this huge acquittal. This happened for many years. This was the single biggest news story in the last government. And a lot of people, certainly the Congress says, that this was something that resulted to a large extent in them collapsing at the time.
That's exactly
How
why
would you respond to that?
That's exactly why I asked you the question, that do you feel that the democratic fiber of this country is so fragile that one narrative which does not appear suitable to somebody is the narrative which will bring down a government? I think we need to.
This doesn't bother you. This question doesn't bother you.
Certainly not.
The
very fact that I said that if those documents had to be produced before my team of auditors, we would come to the same conclusion.
So, last thing on 2G, there's so much more to discuss. Nobody got it wrong, right? There was one court, the CBI court, has acquitted everybody, right? And yet you stand by what you have argued. So then ultimately there's been no justice in this case, is what you're saying, right?
No, by that corollary, the Supreme Court also got it wrong. Would you say that?
No, in terms of people being accused, being charge sheeted, being accused, and then being sentenced, that never took place, right? They were all acquitted ultimately. They're all innocent now. So then there was nobody responsible for this, right?
Then why were the licenses cancelled?
The licenses were cancelled, but nobody was found guilty.
No, see, that's why I said criminal prosecution is very different from irregularity.
So criminal prosecution has failed is my question to you.
I don't get into criminal prosecution. That's not my
No, but
territory.
why don't you answer that question directly, sir?
I'm not competent to answer that question.
But sir, how
you have just read out a portion of the
that
judgment.
Yes.
Why do you want me to make a comment on that judgment?
Because you stand by what you have said. You
on
said
my
that
audit.
on your audit. So on your audit, you say that you would come back with the same sort of values, the same sort of system, and yet there's a court which says that there's no evidence which has been produced. Everybody seems to be innocent. There seems to be a certain mismatch.
There's no mismatch at all. That's why I said we are getting our fundamentals incorrect.
Okay.
One is audit, the other is investigation, and we must recognize that these are entirely different things. And anybody who says that it was the criminal investigation has anything to do with the audit report is fundamentally making a mistake. And that's why I said there are three links to it. There is the audit report, there is a cancellation of licenses, and then there is criminal prosecution. Three independent things. Criminal prosecution, if it's wrong, then the licenses should not have been cancelled.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next part. You've also spoken about coal allocation, and of course, what the Supreme Court did is remove that coal allocation which had taken place. How would you respond to people like B.K. Chaturvedi, the ex-cabinet secretary, who says the CAG report, and I quote, that's his quote, ignored the way decision making is done in governments and came from a position which was, strictly speaking, factually incorrect? Another senior bureaucrat, a credible gentleman.
Yeah. Comptroller and Auditor Generals are exposed as much to bureaucracy or administration as anybody else. Now, anybody who did the coal report has done enough about government procedures not to be wrong on that very fundamental point. He's got an opinion.
Yes, of course.
I respect that opinion. I don't conform to it.
How would you respond to those, and again this is opposition leaders who, referring both to coal and 2G, say that the investment environment in the country was affected, and with reference to the coal block, Congress leaders have told me retrospective cancellation of coal blocks by the Supreme Court is based on the CAG report, which destroyed a favorable investment climate. Can any policy pronouncement be trusted? So they're drawing a parallel. They're saying one influenced the other. And
fundamentally incorrect. You've just said that the coal allocations were based upon the CAG report. When I told you that the judgment, and I've quoted it, the judgment clearly said that the CAG's report is kept aside. We are not looking at it. So that statement obviously is proven to be fundamentally incorrect.
Okay. If we look at the other part of what you are presently doing as an administrator in the cricket board, you've referred to yourself as the longest playing night watchman.
Yes.
But that's also linked fundamentally to your belief that administrators need to work according to a fixed tenure, right? That they shouldn't be there for a very long period of time. How much longer would you want to hold on to this post? Of course, it's a Supreme Court appointment, but in your own mind, how long would you like to hold on to this post? It's been a few years now.
You tell me, do I decide how long I have to hold on to it?
No, I'm asking for your thoughts.
What?
The court decides.
No, why? No, the court also does not decide. Let's get these perspectives right. Okay, the court appointed us because despite a direction of the court about 7 months before our appointment, the BCCI persons refused to agree to the judgment of the court.
Yeah, intransigence of elected functionaries in carrying out reforms resulted in the Supreme Court intervention. Intransigence of elected functionaries, your words in your book. Yes, so that's the reason why it happened.
Intransigence is the word used by the Supreme Court verdict itself appointing us.
Right.
They said there's been intransigence of the office bearers, and now we are appointing the Committee of Administrators. Two functions. The first function is they will run the administration of the BCCI through the CEO, and the existing office bearers will work under their supervision. So that's the administration. The other mandate was that they will make the BCCI and its state associations
Yeah.
except the constitution as given out by the Supreme Court. Now, no tenure was prescribed. Our job was to make them accept the constitution, because the Supreme Court direction they had negated totally over 7 months. They refused, and that's why the word
Yes.
intransigence was used. Now, for about 6 months, we tried to build consensus. But that is when I say a night watchman who played so long, because there were people, vested interests, interested parties, whatever you may say, who had been on the job for 40 years at a stretch.
Yeah.
And they felt that there was no reason for them to be removed. Now, these people were not willing for a consensus. So, we had to go in and report to the Supreme Court again. It was on the 9th of August last year that the Supreme Court finally gave a verdict saying these are the guidelines for the constitution, and now we are in the process. We have fixed the date for the election. October 22nd
So
is the date.
is there unanimity within the cricket administrators, you and Diana Edulji now?
There is unanimity between the three of us
Yes.
now, and because of that unanimity, we fixed the date as October 22nd.
But
for
you would
the
agree that that unanimity was missing earlier on. For example, there were reports that Diana Edulji was not in favor of your decision to ask the ICC to ban Pakistan from the World Cup. Was
See,
that a problem? I
no,
mean, was there a serious difference?
No, there were serious differences. No denying that. We were a committee of 4 persons originally appointed.
and that
two,
came down, yes.
2 people were left behind. Now, you can, even Supreme Court verdicts, you find 2 judges differing at
Dissenting,
times. So, we had differences of viewpoints. There is absolutely no denying the fact. And now also that we are a 3-member body, we still have some discussion. Sometimes there are differences, you can't have unanimity, but now it's a 2 versus 1, I may be that 1, somebody else may be that 1. But
So were you disturbed when the Supreme Court said, and this is I believe a quote from, it's a statement from the court, not an order, we have heard in newspaper reports that some sparring is going on between the committee of administrators. Was this troublesome for you when this emerged, because there were reports that there were a couple of issues where there were differences?
I'm not familiar with that quote, so I really can't say what it was, because, but yes, there was a lot in the media.
It's
there
been
was
reported in the Times of India as part of a detailed article, but carry on,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm
There
not
are
familiar.
other differences also which have emerged.
I just mentioned to you there were differences, the perspectives were different, and the perceptions were different. So there were differences, there's
Okay.
no denying the fact.
Differences with Diana Edulji over the punishment to Hardik Pandya and KL Rahul after inappropriate remarks which they made on a Karan Johar television program. How problematic was that?
No, there
for
was
you?
no difference on that issue.
The extent of punishment, or were there differences?
No,
in
no,
your
no.
views?
Let me explain what happened. That those remarks came, the players were playing abroad.
Yes.
It was
Australia.
decided that they would be suspended from certain games. They were called back. No difference on that.
Yes.
All that happened was, then it was decided that the suspension would be withdrawn. That was because it was an executive order. The amicus said yes, you can withdraw it, and it was withdrawn. There were no differences on that issue. There were differences on other issues, but not on that.
What
particular.
issues were there differences on?
Oh, there were differences on the appointment of a coach for the women's
Yes.
team. Oh, there was differences on certain allegations which were made against the CEO.
Yes.
These were 2 issues on which there were differences. Fair enough.
Okay. You've also written about several other issues. Criminal candidates, you've spoken about civil servants, sexual harassment allegations in the Supreme Court, and the CBI. I'd like to actually talk about the CBI next. I found a lot of your views to be quite interesting. You've said over the years the CBI has often been described as a handmaiden of the government in power, but you've also made the point that this has been an allegation for a long time. But then there's one fairly hard-hitting statement. Increasingly, there's a decline in the professional capability of officers being appointed to the agency with a preference for loyal officers. How deep is this rot?
What does handmaiden mean?
It's the same thing,
It's the
hand-selected
same.
officers.
Isn't it?
Yes.
So, handmaiden is an expression which again I did not invent.
No.
Handmaiden is
Yeah.
an expression which has come over the times.
Yeah.
When you use an expression handmaiden, it means selected officers. Now, that rot, I'm saying that rot has continued, and that rot is not of the last 5 years or 10 years. It started from the day when Indira Gandhi gave an extension to the then director of the CBI, and he went and investigated government officers who were looking into records of the Maruti at that time. So
No,
it's a long drawn process.
And it's crippling, isn't it?
It has become crippling. You see, when you have competence becoming, playing second fiddle to some loyalty factor, maybe in the CBI, maybe in any other institution, it does, cripple the organization, or it does affect the quality of that organization.
So you would agree that the CBI, and the court said this in another context, remains a caged parrot?
I mean, if the Supreme Court has come to that
No, but they said
conclusion,
it in another case. I'm asking about in the present context, as of today, do you believe the CBI remains a caged parrot?
well, I have no evidence before me to say that.
You're being very diplomatic.
No, it's not a question of being diplomatic. See, if I have to make a statement, I must base my statement on certain facts before me. Now, the court made that statement
Yes.
based on certain facts before them. I have quoted that, and that was that when the affidavit was being prepared, and the ministry against whom that affidavit had to be prepared was interfering in it. That was a justifiable statement at that time.
Okay. Somewhat related, the role of civil servants. A civil service can be effective only when it is allowed to perform on its own merit, strength and capability without any extraneous influences. This is also part of the rot, that the system is influenced by political leaders. They can't do their job.
The example I've given is that of the Election Commission.
Yes.
The Election Commission is run by the same bureaucracy.
But has worked splendidly in the past.
Why?
Yes.
Why?
I'm not sure. Tell us.
It's because it is a totally independent body. Similarly, I've given the example of the Comptroller and Auditor General. I mean, somebody may say that a report has gone against them, but the Comptroller and Auditor General or the Indian Audit and Accounts Department is absolutely apolitical. Their proficiency cannot, their professionalism cannot be faulted, and they are recognized to be a world recognized body which has been selected to do such specialized audits as the International Atomic Energy Agency. So what the point I'm making is that when extraneous influences are absent, that very same bureaucracy delivers absolutely impeccable results.
Okay. One final point I found important in your book on allegations of sexual harassment in the Supreme Court. And you said, and I quote, "The court may have acquitted itself better by following a transparent process, entrusting inquiry to an external committee and permitting the complainant the assistance of a lawyer," with reference to a very recent case. Do you believe that the Supreme Court went terribly wrong in this? A wrong precedent has been set?
No, there's no question of a wrong precedent being set. If you read that carefully, I'm quoting from a study which had been done or a news report, and I'm saying that in the
But
news
this
report,
is your statement, it's not a quote. It's
that-
your quote, nobody else.
That's what I'm saying. I'm deriving it from that quote, which was a study which came out in, I don't know whether it's a newspaper or some journal, which says that there were demands, number one, to permit a lawyer to the complainant. The other was to make available the statements. Now, permitting a lawyer, I think, is something which is normal, very normal.
And that should have been
And
done.
that's why
it didn't take place over here.
That's why I said permitting a lawyer is something which could have been permitted.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you believe there was perhaps a lack of justice in the way this was carried out?
Certainly not lack of justice. Certainly not lack
If
of
a
justice.
lawyer was denied?
I mean, see, a lawyer was denied, there must have been other avenues. Because
If
all
a
those
lawyer is denied, what other avenues are there?
No, the issue is that then the complainant has to decide, isn't it?
Yes.
The complainant has to decide what to do about it. So it's not a question of denial of justice. It's that report that I'm talking about is quoting a process. And a lot of these details didn't come out into public domain, and that's what it's all about.
Last point, criminal candidates. You wrote, "Considering the number of cases pending against elected members, the greater fear is that those mandated to undertake lawmaking may be lawbreakers themselves." And a related point, the conduct of our MPs in Parliament. They may not necessarily be, criminal candidates may be very well behaved in Parliament, so I'm not getting there. But you wrote about this in the context of Parliament. So Could you tell us your views on criminal candidates? How much of a danger do they represent to our polity? And secondly, the conduct of parliamentarians.
See, criminal candidates is the details of which I've got, and I've quoted it from the ADR report, because I have no independent information about how many criminal cases are pending against candidates, but they've talked about certain numbers. That's what I've quoted. That's number one. Number two is, see, the reputation of a parliament is not by the architecture of that building. The reputation of parliament is the people who populate that building, the quality of the people who populate that building. And the moment that quality declines, so every person's track record, every person's performance, the quality of the debate in that parliament is the one which defines the reputation of the parliament. Now, having disruptions every other day, and I've given a viewpoint in it, and that pertains to the budget. See, the budget document is just about the most important document that the government puts out every year. Now, the budget document not being discussed is not a fair thing at all. The members of parliament must discuss that document at least. That's why I've said, and is finding of lots of other studies also within the parliament itself, which says that these disruptive procedures or what should I say, time and again disruptions have affected the efficiency of the functioning of the parliament.
Well, Mr. Vinod Rai, holding to account India's public institutions, Rethinking Good Governance is the name of your book. Thank you for being direct in your answers, because I thought we took upon ourselves to ask you lots of direct questions on your role. This is the book. It certainly gives you a perspective of somebody who's been regarded as somebody who's fought against corruption, fought for honesty, integrity and accountability. In the process, lots of questions have been asked of him, but you've clearly answered quite a few of them. Thanks, sir, very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.